Hey everybody, tonight's video is called A New City and a New Temple. And tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Ezekiel. We're going to be looking at the measuring of the courts of the new temple. So following the great battle at the end of time will be the details concerning Christ's millennial reign through the rest of the book here. And it's kind of like the climax of the prophecy of Ezekiel and Israel's restoration. So from here through chapter 43, it includes the new temple. We're going to see between Ezekiel 43 through Ezekiel 46, the new worship and the new appointment of the land in Ezekiel 47-48. So chapters 40 through 48 in a nutshell are a detailed unfolding of the promise that's given that we saw back in Ezekiel 37 verse 24 through 38. So we are in Ezekiel chapter 40, and we're going to look at verse 1. It says, "In the 25th year of our captivity, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was captured, on the very same day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he took me there." So the 25th year speaks of 573 BC and the first month of the ecclesiastical year Nisan. And the 10th day was the start of the preparations for Passover. And I realized that they're actually beginning Passover in the Jewish traditions this weekend. In verse 2, it says, "In the visions of God, he took me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain. On it, towards the south, was something like a structure of a city." So the remainder of the book narrates another vision, as did Ezekiel 1:1 through chapter 3. Ezekiel chapters 8 through 11 and Ezekiel 37. And the characterization of the prophecy as a vision in no way detracts from its literal reality any more than Ezekiel's visions of Jerusalem's sins, idolatry, and destruction did. And the mountain here isn't named, but it's most likely speaking of Mount Zion, as seen in Isaiah 2:2 and Micah 4:1, lifted up from its surroundings by a great earthquake, talked about in Zechariah 14, verse 5 through 10. And we'll actually be in those minor books of Micah and Zechariah over the summer. And God will be explaining details relating to Israel's spiritual future. So this must be the temple in particular, in Jerusalem in general. And so this new and glorious temple will stand contrast to the desecration and the destruction of Solomon's temple in Ezekiel chapters 8 through 11. And mountaintops were common in the Old Testament for revelations from God, like Moses received God's law, and the design for the tabernacle in Exodus chapters 19 through chapter 40. And Moses saw the promised land from another mountaintop back in Deuteronomy 34 verse 1 through 4, though he did not enter it. And likewise, Ezekiel as well receives legislation and a design for a sanctuary on top of a mountaintop, though he won't live to see this fulfilled. And in verse 3, it says, "He took me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like an appearance of bronze. He had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he stood in the gateway." So an angel conducted a tour of all the details shown to the prophet, apparent in the form of a man, like seen in Genesis 18 and Ezekiel 9, apparent like a gleam in bronze. And he could be understood as the angel of the Lord, since he is called Lord. And his line of flax was the larger measurements, the rod for shorter ones. In each case, God measured what belongs to him. And we're going to see measuring is a key theme through chapters 40 through 48. And the supernatural guide was waiting for Ezekiel. Verse 4, "And the man said to me, Son of man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears, and fix your mind on everything I show you, for you were brought here so that I might show them to you, declare the house of Israel everything you see. So we see Ezekiel's to write down all the details, and John received similar instructions in the book of Revelation, and we'll be covering some parts of that in a wrap-up. And the man told Ezekiel to focus his senses, paying close attention. And now I do realize when it comes to Ezekiel 40 through 48, some believe that this temple is speaking of just a spiritual or something symbolic. And the thing I've always wondered with those belief systems is, why did Ezekiel have to write down detailed information? Why did he have to carefully note the details? And there would be really no need if it was just a, kind of like a parable or something, like a visual type for spiritual symbolism. And we'll discuss briefly in the wrap-up, we will hit on the 4 different interpretations of the text here in the final chapters. And it's a major debate among many theologians and different Christians, and it causes quite a divide among Christians. I've seen Christians can get very nasty toward each other in the secondary doctrines of eschatology. And you may disagree with me, and we might not agree, we might agree, we might disagree. That's okay. It's not a critical doctrine that splits us between true Christians and not. However, regardless of what camp you're in out of the 4, we should all be diving deeper in learning from each other our views. And so verse 5, let's continue on here. Now there was a wall all around the outside of the temple, and the man's hand was a measuring rod, 6 cubits long, each being a cubit and a hand breadth, and he measured the width of the wall structure 1 rod, and the height 1 rod. So Ezekiel 42 verse 20 will describe this outer wall as a separation from the holy areas. And the temple here couldn't have been the heavenly temple, since Ezekiel was taken to Israel to see it. And it could not be Zerubbabel's temple, since the glory of God wasn't present there. And it could not be the eternal temple, since the Lord and the Lamb are its temple. And therefore, I believe it speaking of the earthly millennial temple built with all of the magnificent details that are yet to be outlined. And the rod extended 21 inches for a total of 10.5 feet. Each cubit made up a standard width of 18 inches and a hand breadth of 3 inches. In verse 6 and 7, you're going to see that we're going to move a little bit faster pace as we get through more of the descriptions here. Verse 6 and 7, then he went to the gateway which faced the east, and he went up its stairs and measured the threshold of the gateway, which was 1 rod wide, and the other threshold was 1 rod wide. Each gate chamber was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. Between the gate chambers was a space of 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gateway by the vestibule of the inside gate was 1 rod. So the buildings of the east gate are first, because this will be a direct line of approach to the temple. And each opening we see is 10.5 feet across. And chambers and rooms in the wall are 10.5 by 10.5 feet. And precise measurements describe a literal temple, not a symbolic one, in my belief. In verse 8 through 16 says, he also measured the vestibule of the inside gate 1 rod. Then he measured the vestibule of the gateway 8 cubits, and the gate post 2 cubits. The vestibule of the gate was on the inside, and the eastern gateway was 3 gate chambers on one side and 3 on the other. The 3 were all the same size. Now the gate posts were of all the same size on this side and that side. He measured the width of the entrance to the gateway 10 cubits, and the length of the gate 13 cubits. There was a space in front of the gate chambers, 1 cubit on this side and 1 cubit on that side. The gate chambers were 6 cubits on this side and 6 cubits on that side. Then he measured the gateway from the roof of one gate chamber to the roof of the other. The width was 25 cubits as door faces door. He measured the gate posts 60 cubits high, in the court all around the gateway extended to the gate posts. From the front of the entrance gate to the front of the vestibule of the inner gate was 50 cubits. There were beveled window frames in the gate chambers, and in their intervening archways on the inside of the gateway, all around, and likewise in the vestibules. There were windows all around on the inside, and on each gate post were palm trees. So the chambers described here are the accommodations for the minister and priest and the temple officers who care for this temple. And palms are a symbol of beauty, salvation, and triumph, as seen in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 6. And palms are on the inner court's gate posts as well. And again, this describes more than an entrance to the temple area. And then we're going to read a big chunk here, verse 17 through 37. It says, "Then he brought me into the outer court, and there were chambers and a pavement made all around the court. 30 chambers faced the pavement. The pavement was by the side of the gateways, corresponding to the length of the gateways. This was the lower end pavement. Then he measured the width from the front of the lower gateway to the front of the inner court exterior, 100 cubits toward the east and the north. On the outer court was also a gateway facing north, and he measured its length and its width, its gate chambers, 3 on this side, 3 on that side, and its gate posts and its archways had the same measurements as the first gate. Its length was 50 cubits and its width 25 cubits. Its windows and those of its archways and also its palm trees had the same measurements as the gateway facing east. It was ascended by 7 steps, and it was the archway was in front of it. A gate of the inner court was opposite the northern gateway, just as the eastern gateway, and he measured from gateway to gateway 100 cubits. After that, he brought me toward the south, and there was a gateway was facing south, and he measured its gate posts and archways according to these same measurements. There were windows in it, and its archways all around like those windows. Its length was 50 cubits, and its width 25 cubits. 7 steps led up to it, and its archway was in front of them. It had palm trees on the gate posts, 1 on this side, 1 on that side. There was also a gateway inner court facing south, and he measured from gateway to gateway toward the south 100 cubits. Then he brought me into the inner court through the southern gateway. He measured the southern gateway according to these same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, its archways were according to the same measurements. There were windows in it, and its archways all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. There were archways all around the 25 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Its archways faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate posts, and going up to it were 8 steps. And he brought me into the inner court facing east. He measured the gateway according to the same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways were according to the same measurements, and there were windows in it, and its archways all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its archways faced the outer court, and palm trees were on its gate posts on this side and on that side. Going up to it were 8 steps. Then he brought me to the northern gateway, and he measured it according to these same measurements. Also its gates, chambers, gate posts, and archways. It had windows all around. Its length was 50 cubits, and the width 25 cubits. Its gate post faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate posts on this side and on that side, and going up to it were 8 steps. So tons of measurement descriptions, as I mentioned. So we see the outer court is farthest out from the temples proper and enclosed by the outer walls. And the section is really a blueprint spelled out to us for the temple area with more precise measurements. And you're going to notice some very common numbers. Number 5, 25, 50, and 100 are used frequently. And the sanctuary formed a square of some 500 cubits. And the worshippers are admitted to the outer court, but only priests and the Levites could enter the inner court. And the northern and southern gates look the same as the eastern gate. And what we can identify here is there's no western gate, because the area behind the most holy place does block off to prevent access to the temple from the rear. So in kind of like a military movement strategy, you want rear security. And the inner court is separated from the outer court and is elevated by a further 8 steps. And we see the 3 substantial gateways. And we're going to see more in chapter 43 that animals sacrificed or slaughtered in the gateways to the inner court, and they washed the parts and they hung them on hooks. And to continue on here, verse 39 through 43 says, in the vestibule of the gateway were 2 tables on this side and 2 tables on that side, on which they slay the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. From the outer side of the vestibule, as one goes up to the entrance of the northern gateway, were 2 tables, and on the other side, the vestibule of the gateway, were 2 tables. 4 tables were on this side and 4 tables on that side. By the side of the gateway, 8 tables on which they slaughtered the sacrifices. There were also 4 tables of hewn stone for the burnt offering, 1 cubit and half long, 1 cubit and a half wide, and 1 cubit high. On these they laid the instruments with which they slaughtered burnt offering and sacrifice. Inside were hooks, a hand breadth wide, fastened all round, and the flesh of the sacrifices was on the table, as we discussed. So we see the different offerings, and you really got to go back to the book of Leviticus chapters 1, Leviticus 4, Leviticus chapter 6, and Leviticus chapter 7, and I've done videos on those in the past to know what these different offerings were about. And this section here is describing the chambers for the priests, and it raises the question of sacrifices in the millennial kingdom. And we see them exist, but they will be no more effectuous than they were of Old Testament times. And no sacrifice before or Christ after Christ saves. And they only point to him as the one true Lamb who can actually take away our sin. And 4 tables are on either side of the inner courts. The north gate, as we mentioned, used to memorize the death of Christ by slaying burnt, sin, and trespass offerings. In verse 44 says, outside the inner gate were the chambers for the singers in the inner court, one facing south at the side of the northern gateway, and the other facing north at the side of the southern gateway. So we see provision is made for the praises of the redeemed in music. In verse 45-46, then he said to me, this chamber which faces south is for the priests who have charge of the temple. The chamber which faces north is for the priests who have charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok, from the sons of Levi, who come near the Lord to minister to him. So in addition to the singers, there were also those who guarded and looked over the temple and its administration. So kind of like security in a way. And proper names of the sons of Zadok tie the vision to historical reality, calling for literal interpretation here. And this Levitical family descended from Levi, Aaron, Eleazar, and Phinehas back in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 3-8. And according to God's covenant with Phinehas in Numbers chapter 25, verse 10-13, and because of Eli's unfaithfulness in 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, and Zadok's faithfulness to David and Solomon in 1 Kings 1, verse 32-40, Zadok's sons serve as priests in the millennial temple. And they referenced also in Ezekiel 43, verse 19, Ezekiel 44, verse 15, and Ezekiel 48, verse 11. So Zadok's sons are going to be seen again up ahead. And one other important theme that we should not miss here is observed in these chapters with the restriction of access to God to those whom he has chosen and those who are fit to enter the holy space. Verse 47 continues, and he measured the court 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, 4 square. The altar was in front of the temple. So the court around the temple was a square around the square temple. And the bronze altar is where offerings occur. Verse 48 through 49, and I believe that's going to wrap up today's chapter, says, Then he brought me to the vestibule of the temple and measured the doorposts of the vestibule, 5 cubits on this side and 5 cubits on that side. And the width of the gateway was 3 cubits on this side and 3 cubits on that side. The length of the vestibule was 20 cubits, and the width 11 cubits. By the steps which led up to it, there were pillars by the doorposts, one on this side and another on that side. So this refers to the temple porch and is similar to that of Solomon's temple. And you can find the pillars presumably resemble Zachin and Boaz in Solomon's temple in 1 Kings 7, verse 15 through 22. So to wrap up today's chapter, we look tonight at the measuring of the courts of the new temple as Ezekiel is taken to Jerusalem in a vision. And in verse 3, we saw the man with the measuring rod. And I want to go over to the book of Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11 in John's vision here. So Revelation 11 verse 1 says, Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. And let's go over to Revelation 21 verse 5 through 10. Revelation 21 verse 5 through 10. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable murderers, sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls, filled with the 7 plagues, came to me and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. And let's actually read through verse 11. Having the glory of God, her light was like the most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. So John's revelation, we can find when you read it with Ezekiel, it's very similar alike in some ways, in many ways. In verse 4 of Ezekiel 40, showed the man with the measuring rod speaking to Ezekiel. And I just want to take a time real quick to go over the promised 4 points, the 4 different interpretations of this section of Ezekiel. So we have the literal prophetic, who believe that Ezekiel expected would be built by the returning exiles in their restoration to the land, so that Ezekiel gave details based off a memory of Solomon's temple as an encouragement to the exiles. And one popular theologian that holds that belief was Adam Clarke. Symbolic. Some see Ezekiel 40 through 48 as symbolic, describing the Christian church in spiritual truths, and that God would provide his people a temple, a priesthood, and worship system. And that's a very common belief system for those that believe the millennial reign is a symbolic representing the church age, you know, not a literal 1,000 years, but for a long period of time. Number 3, dispensationalists. They believe that the temple coming is literal millennial age, not the eternal age temple, but period of literal 1,000 year reign of Jesus over the earth. And then there's the 4th one, not as common, the apocalyptic. And that's symbolic and fantastical images of a coming age among these popular in the pagan world. So they kind of believe like society just changed it changed, ways of everything. And so Ezekiel 40 verse 5 showed the wall outside the temple. And talking about the eternal temple, let's go to Revelation chapter 21. And I believe I want verse 22. It says, "But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple." So in the eternal temple, the Lord and his Lamb are the temple. And verse 6 through 10 of Ezekiel 40 shows the eastern gateway. Verse 11 through 16 showed the entrance to the eastern gateway. And I want to look at Revelation 7 verse 9 real quick. It says here, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nation, tribe, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands." Let's read verse 10 too. "And crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." So palm branches are even seen among the multitude from the great tribulation in John's vision. Ezekiel 40 verse 17 through 19 shows the pavement of the outer court. Verse 20 through 23, the northern gateway. Verse 24 through 27 covered the southern gateway. Verse 28 through 37 covers the gateways of the inner courts. Verse 38 through 43 shows the chamber for sacrifices. And verses 44 through 46 shows the chambers for the singers and the priests. And we see that the chapter ends with the measuring of the inner courts in its passage. So we'll see you next for an actual topical Saturday. So I hope that you have a great rest of your evening, and I'll let you know what the topic will be on Saturday. God bless.